Hello, family. Enjoy this relaxing moment with Surly Tales. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Nkem stared at the flickering light bulb in her cramped one-room apartment on the outskirts of bustling Lagos, feeling the hum of the city reverberate through the thin walls. The ocean of tin roofs that surrounded her building seemed endless, an unbroken sea of corrugated iron that glimmered under the hot African sun by day and turned into a gray canopy by night. At 22 years old, Nkem had never left the comfort of her parents' home in the small countryside of Enugu State until a year ago. But after her family's cocoa farm fell on hard times, she moved to Lagos to seek a better life. She found only the endless struggle for survival that the city offered to the majority of its inhabitants. In one corner of her apartment, a small transistor radio softly played high-life music. The static-laced sound lulled her into memories of her village, dirt roads flanked by slender palm trees, the persistent chirping of crickets at dusk, and her grandmother's stories about a life with less worry. But every memory was overshadowed by the present. She was broke, jobless, and desperate. Nkem's hands trembled as she fingered the flyers she had collected that day from various recruitment centers. None of them had called her back for an interview. At times, the city's gates to opportunity seemed permanently barred to her. She rose from the rickety wooden chair in front of a small mirror nailed to the wall and gazed at her reflection. Despite her meager living conditions, she still carried herself with grace. Her angular face, framed by intricately braided hair, showcased youthful optimism in her large brown eyes. For a moment, she traced the edges of her reflection and remembered the countless suitors back in her village who had begged for her hand in marriage. Nkem had turned them all down. She had always believed she was meant for something more than early marriage and a life of quiet acceptance. A sudden burst of shouting filtered in from the corridor. The cackling voice of her neighbor, Mama Kelechi, mingled with an agitated man's retort. They seemed to be arguing over money, yet another reminder that, in Lagos, money was the common language everyone longed to speak fluently. Nkem sighed, locked her door from the inside with a rusty padlock, then sat down again on her bed, an old mattress lying on the bare cement floor. Fate, it seemed, would offer her a glimpse of opportunity in the most unlikely place, the gossip columns of a city tabloid. Perched on her bed, she scanned through the creased, second-hand newspaper she had picked up earlier in the day. It contained sensational stories about the wealthy elite of Lagos, politicians, oil magnates, and tech entrepreneurs who lived a world apart from people like her. One article stood out from the rest: billionaire real estate mogul Odion Esang, looking for an heir? Nkem's interest peaked at the headline. She read on, heart pounding with excitement. The article suggested that Odion Esang, one of Nigeria's youngest billionaires, was rumored to be desperate for an heir to his sprawling empire. There were mentions of a rumor, a swirl of speculation that he had pledged a grand mansion in Banana Island to the mother of his first child. Banana Island was one of the most exclusive, luxurious neighborhoods in Lagos, a place Nkem had only heard about in whispered awe. The possibility stirred something in her, a vision of leaving her squalid apartment behind forever, living in a place with marble floors and private security, and never again worrying about borrowed money or joblessness. She stared at the grainy photo of Odion that accompanied the article. He had regal features, a sharp jawline, intelligent eyes, and a charismatic smile that radiated confidence. The story said he was 35 and had once come from a humble background. His father had passed away when Odion was just a child, and he had built his real estate empire from the ground up. Nkem could not help but admire him, even through the cheap newsprint. Yet, beneath the surface, her mind churned with an idea that frightened her as much as it excited her. She recalled a bizarre news story from a few months back, a scandal involving a woman who claimed she became pregnant by unconventional means. The memory was hazy, but Nkem remembered it was something about a used condom. Could she ever stoop that low? The question was unsettling, but poverty and desperation could push ordinary people to extraordinary lengths. The more she thought about it, the more her heart hammered in her chest. She had always been a proud virgin, taught to guard her body, and had never imagined losing her innocence outside of love or marriage. But Lagos was an unforgiving city. It demanded sacrifices that no one ever saw coming. Her desperation knocked on the door of her morality, begging her to let it in. Nkem felt ashamed that such a wild, immoral plan was crossing her mind, yet she could not deny that the possibility of finding a way to secure a life for herself, perhaps for her aging parents too, was intoxicating. As the night deepened, the high life on the radio was replaced by the hushed, crackling broadcasts of late-night talk shows. The city's horns and humming generators outside never fully subsided, they only softened to an ambient background noise. Sleep was difficult to come by. Images of a luxurious mansion and a future free from financial dread paraded through her mind. She tried to chase them away, reminding herself of her moral values. Still, that single newspaper article had given her a dangerous spark of hope. The next morning, she woke up feeling more restless than ever. Before heading out, she took a long look at the article again, folded it neatly, and slipped it into her handbag. She did not have a solid plan, only a vague sense of purpose. She could not simply walk up to Odion and declare her intentions. Even the thought made her flush with embarrassment. Yet, seeds of determination began to sprout in her heart. If there was indeed a rumor that Odion would give away a lavish home to the mother of his first child, perhaps that meant he was seeking that mother, and an heir, desperately enough to overlook any suspicious details. Perhaps, in her own cunning way, Nkem could get close to him. She was a virgin, yes, but knowledge of the city's darkest rumors and cunning survival instincts were seeping into her soul. Nothing was certain, but Nkem knew one thing: she had to find a way into Odion Esang's world. Whether it meant applying as a cleaner in one of his many properties, or catching him at a public function, she would not rest until she got close enough to catch sight of the life she had so long been denied. Little did she know that in her quest for a better life, she was about to cross lines she once believed were sacred. And in the course of chasing her dream, she would set in motion a chain of events that not only threatened her innocence, but also the moral fabric of her conscience. Staring out of the window of the rickety Danfo bus weaving through Lagos traffic, Nkem held tightly onto the overhead rail. She was on her way to Victoria Island, a place of glamour and skyscrapers, hoping to catch a glimpse of Odion Esang's head office. Her plan was bold, perhaps foolish, but she had reasoned it out in her mind. If he was as wealthy and influential as the tabloids claimed, he might have job openings in one of his numerous estates. Maybe she could start at the bottom, working as a housekeeper, secretary, or anything that would give her a chance to be near him. The bus jerked to a sudden stop. Victoria Island last bus stop, the conductor bellowed. Nkem alighted, adjusting the strap of her worn handbag on her shoulder. She gazed around at the opulent buildings, glass-walled towers that glistened in the morning sun and well-paved roads lined with palm trees. It felt as though she had entered a different country entirely. The chaos of the mainland was replaced by a refined hustle, expensive cars zipped past, and well-dressed men and women hurried into corporate offices. Her heart pounded as she approached Esang Towers, a gleaming high-rise with bold, silver letters reading Esang Global Holdings. The cool air of the lobby, scented with polished marble, contrasted sharply with the sweaty bustle outside. People in neat suits moved with purpose, badges clipped to their lapels, exuding a sense of importance. Nkem looked down at her own attire, a plain blouse, a long skirt, and cheap slippers. The difference was stark, and for a moment, she hesitated. Would anyone even let her through the front doors? Gathering her courage, she stepped into the lobby. The receptionist, a poised woman with meticulously braided hair, eyed her curiously. "Good morning, how may I help you?" she asked politely, though her smile did not reach her eyes. I came to apply for any available positions," Nkem stammered. She could feel the heat rising to her cheeks. "Do you have an appointment?" the receptionist asked. Her eyes trailed over Nkem's outfit before flitting back to her computer screen. Nkem shook her head, feeling her hopes slip away. "I'm sorry, I just thought." Before she could finish, the receptionist cut her off. "We don't take walk-in applicants. You need to submit your resume online or through our HR portal." Her polite tone had an undercurrent of finality. "Thank you," Nkem managed, bowing her head slightly before turning away. She felt her heart sink, but as she reached the doors, a voice behind her made her stop. "Miss, excuse me. Could you wait a moment?" She turned to see a young woman wearing a slightly different badge that read Executive Assistant. She introduced herself as Chigizi. "You're looking for work, right?" Chigizi asked, her brows knitted in concern. "Yes, any work," Nkem responded quietly. "Cleaning, front desk, anything. I'm willing to learn." Her eyes shone with a sincerity that made Chigizi pause. Chigizi sized her up quickly. "Look, I can't promise anything," she said, lowering her voice. "But we sometimes hire temporary workers for corporate events. We have a major opening ceremony for a new estate next week. Why don't I take your name and number? If something comes up, I'll let you know." Nkem felt a rush of gratitude. She scribbled her details on a small piece of paper and handed it to Chigizi, who tucked it into her folder. "Thank you," Nkem said, almost breathless with relief. "Don't thank me yet," Chigizi smiled wryly, glancing over her shoulder as if wary of being watched. "Mr. Esang can be particular, and HR has their own protocols. But I'll see what I can do." Leaving the building, Nkem found herself buoyed by fresh hope. Perhaps fortune smiled on her, after all. She wandered along the manicured sidewalks of Victoria Island, taking in the upscale boutiques, lavish restaurants, and pristine malls. Everything felt a world away from her reality, but she clung to the possibility of earning enough money to pay her rent, or at least eat without worrying about her next meal. Several days passed in anxious anticipation. She scrolled her phone ceaselessly, checking for a missed call or message from Esang Global Holdings. When her phone finally rang one late afternoon, she nearly dropped it from excitement. The voice on the other end introduced herself as someone from the administrative team, explaining that Esang Global was seeking ushers and event staff for the grand opening of a new luxury apartment complex. Nkem was to report the next morning for orientation. That night, sleep was elusive. Her mind was a swirl of thoughts. What if she managed to come face to face with Odion himself? Would that be her moment to capture his attention? Could she glean any personal details that would help her future plan? Despite the guilt gnawing at the back of her mind, she remained resolute. She was desperate, and desperation, she reminded herself, often brewed cunning. The next day, Nkem arrived at the new estate in Lekki, another affluent area of Lagos. Large banners declared, "Esang Global Holdings Presence, Serenity Estates." Security personnel in crisp uniforms guided her to a back room where other temporary staff were also gathered. Men and women dressed in matching outfits busied themselves with last-minute preparations, arranging chairs, testing sound systems, and making sure the event stage was immaculate. She was handed an usher's uniform, a simple white blouse and a black skirt with the Esang logo embroidered on the sleeve. As she slipped into the attire, she felt a tingle of excitement. This was her first time participating in an event so grand. Decorations of white drapes and gold accents were everywhere, and a faint aroma of jasmine air freshener filled the expansive hall. By noon, important-looking guests began to arrive: socialites, politicians, and business moguls. The energy in the room surged with every new entrance. Journalists hustled about, cameras flashing as they tried to capture any noteworthy face. Standing by the entrance, handing out brochures, Nkem kept an eye on each sleek car that pulled up, hoping for a glimpse of Odion. Finally, a black bulletproof SUV rolled into the driveway. Out stepped a tall, imposing man in a tailored suit, Odion Esang himself. He gave a nod to the security detail and walked confidently into the hall, accompanied by his close aides. In person, he radiated even more charisma than his photographs suggested, his presence almost commanding the air around him. Nkem's breath caught in her throat as Odion stopped mere meters away to speak with an official. She tried to quell her racing heart, reminding herself that she was just an usher, not some invited guest. Their eyes did not meet. Still, she felt a strange spark when she saw him up close, a mixture of fascination, awe, and the knowledge that she was about to chase after a dream that could cost her dearly. Throughout the event, Nkem watched him from a distance. He mingled gracefully, shaking hands, engaging with the press, and effortlessly radiating the confidence of a self-made billionaire. She couldn't help but notice how women gravitated toward him. She also caught snippets of conversation. Someone mentioned he was single, another whispered that he was looking for a wife to bear him children. Every rumor seemed to swirl around the same essential theme: Odion Esang needed an heir. As the day wore on, Nkem's determination solidified. She may have been a poor girl from an unknown background, but she was now in Odion's orbit, however faintly. The challenge was how to move from an usher's peripheral vision to a key figure in his life, and ultimately, to carry his child. The thought was dizzying, scandalous, and terrifying. Yet, she reminded herself, it was the only chance she could see to escape the vicious cycle of poverty holding her hostage. Little did she know that her path was about to cross with Odion's in a more direct and precarious way than she could have ever anticipated. For fate has its own cunning, and sometimes, the more we chase our desperate dreams, the more we find ourselves entangled in plans that exceed our control. 3 weeks had passed since the grand opening event at Serenity Estates. In that time, Nkem found herself living with a renewed sense of ambition. Though her usher job was temporary, she managed to impress several event managers with her punctuality, politeness, and willingness to learn. That small success opened doors to other short-term gigs, ushering at corporate luncheons, assisting at product launches, and even hosting at a private birthday party for a minor celebrity. Each event brought her a tiny step closer to Lagos elite circles, even if she still felt invisible among the glittering crowd. Despite the flurry of new jobs, thoughts of Odion lingered constantly at the edges of her mind. She would scour the internet for any mention of him, learning everything she could about his business empire and personal life. She discovered that his philanthropic foundation organized monthly benefit galas to raise money for various causes. The next one, aimed at supporting underprivileged children in rural areas, was scheduled for the following weekend at an upscale hotel in Ikoyi. Nkem's ears perked up when she heard that event planners needed extra hands. She submitted her name immediately, hoping this would bring her even closer to Odion. To her delight, she was hired, albeit in a modest capacity. She was to help with backstage coordination and guest registration. It wasn't the high-profile role she might have wished for, but it was a gateway into another exclusive gathering. On the morning of the gala, she arrived early at the Royal Orchid Hotel, an imposing building with gilded doors and plush red carpets leading to a marble-floored lobby. A flurry of activity preceded the gala's start, florists adjusting elaborate centerpieces, chefs in tall white hats, and event staff scurrying about with last-minute instructions. Nkem was stationed at a check-in desk alongside 3 others, each wearing matching uniforms. She immediately scanned the guest list, her heart jumping when she spotted Odion's name near the top. It seemed he would give the keynote address. As the evening got underway, high-profile attendees trickled in, each one clad in designer gowns or sharp tuxedos. Every time the lobby doors slid open, Nkem felt a wave of anticipation. At last, a hush of excitement swept through the room. A bodyguard entered, followed by Odion. He wore a sleek black tuxedo, and next to him was a petite woman in a striking emerald gown. The two made a show-stopping entrance, cameras flashing and onlookers parting as they walked through. Nkem's stomach twisted. Who was this woman at his side? A girlfriend, perhaps, or just a companion for the night? She forced herself to remain calm, even as her mind raced. Was her plan slipping out of reach? If he was already involved with someone, it could complicate her scheme to bear his child. Yet, she rationalized, rumors constantly circulated about powerful men. Maybe this woman wasn't a serious partner. Maybe it was just a public appearance. The night wore on in a predictable fashion. Speeches, performances, dinner, and more speeches. Nkem dutifully checked off guests' names, guided them to their seats, and delivered messages to the event coordinators. By the time the gala ended, her feet ached, but she noted that Odion had stepped away to the smoking area outside the ballroom. Mustering her courage, she discreetly followed, hoping for even the smallest chance at conversation. In the corridor, she saw him standing by a window, smartphone in hand, scrolling through messages. Nkem hesitated, second-guessing whether she should approach. Before she could decide, he glanced up, their eyes locking for the first time. Her heart thudded, and she managed a small nod of acknowledgement as she walked past. He returned the nod, but no words were exchanged. It was fleeting, but even that minor interaction sent a rush of adrenaline through her veins. Just then Odion's phone rang. He stepped away, oblivious to Nkem's continued presence. She watched as his expression grew tense, his voice subdued. Words like urgent, issue with the company's accounts, and immediate meeting floated through the corridor. He ended the call, sighing deeply, and dashed back into the ballroom. Nkem stood frozen for a moment, realizing the night would end without the conversation she had hoped for. Yet fate can be unpredictable. As she turned to leave, the woman in the emerald gown emerged from a side door, adjusting her makeup in a compact mirror. Spotting Nkem, she offered a polite smile. Nkem recognized the moment as an opportunity, uncertain as it was. "You look lovely tonight, Ma," she ventured timidly. The woman examined Nkem's uniform, her face kind. "Thank you, my dear. You're part of the staff?" "Yes, I'm helping with registrations and guest coordination," Nkem explained. She couldn't help but notice how the woman's eyes sparkled with confidence, a sign she was comfortable in these glamorous circles. A short conversation followed, revealing the woman's name, Anita. She was, to Nkem's surprise, Odion's cousin from London, visiting Nigeria for a few weeks. Relief washed over Nkem. This meant she wasn't his romantic partner. Anita handed Nkem a business card, indicating she was always looking for personal assistance or event staff for philanthropic collaborations. "If you're ever looking for a better opportunity, feel free to call me," Anita said graciously. Nkem's eyes lit up. "Thank you so much." She slid the card into her pocket. Even though this encounter was tangential, it could become another pathway into Odion's world. The gala ended, and as the weeks rolled on, Anita's card burned a hole in Nkem's consciousness. She debated calling. Eventually, she mustered the courage and dialed the number. Anita answered swiftly, and they arranged to meet at a chic cafe in Victoria Island. Over coffee, Anita asked about Nkem's background, her skills, and her aspirations. Sensing the younger woman's fervent desire for growth, Anita mentioned a charitable initiative she was launching, a scholarship program for girls in rural communities. She needed someone on the ground to manage logistics. "You'd have to travel with me to some of these villages," Anita explained. "I need someone reliable with local knowledge, who can handle coordination." Though this didn't immediately bring Nkem closer to Odion, she recognized the potential in forging a connection with a member of his family. She accepted the offer without hesitation. Her job was straightforward: gather data on prospective scholarship beneficiaries, liaise with local community leaders, and handle the day-to-day tasks. The pay was meager, but it surpassed anything she had earned before. More importantly, she would be in constant communication with Anita, who might at some point bring her face-to-face with Odion again. During the early days of her new role, Nkem was diligent and focused. Her genuine compassion for the girls and families she met made the work rewarding. Yet, in the recesses of her mind lurked the primary goal: to secure a future that would liberate her from poverty forever, and the means she had considered, stealing a used condom and impregnating herself, never fully faded. One fateful evening, she joined Anita for dinner at Odion's private residence, an imposing mansion perched on a quiet street in Ikoyi. The interior boasted marble floors, glass walls that offered panoramic views of the city skyline, and a staff so efficient that they seemed to float through corridors. Nkem's excitement soared, but she worked hard to mask it beneath a calm exterior. Odion was present, albeit intermittently. He appeared preoccupied with work, taking frequent calls that escalated from calm discussion to heated debate. Nkem sensed tension swirling around him, business challenges that demanded his constant attention. As the night wore on, Anita teased him good-naturedly about overworking himself. "You can't solve all the world's problems in one day," she chided, sipping her after-dinner tea. He only smiled wearily in return. At one point, Odion excused himself to make yet another phone call. Left alone with Anita, Nkem saw her chance to fish for information. "He seems very busy. Does he live here alone?" she asked, feigning casual curiosity. Anita laughed. "Yes, he does. "He's a bit too busy for relationships these days," she said pointedly. "Though the gossip columns claim he's seeking an heir, I can't confirm that. He keeps his personal life extremely private." Nkem nodded, storing away every tidbit for later. A swirl of conflicting emotions rushed through her, excitement at the possibility that he really was searching for someone to bear his child, and guilt over the deceitful means she was contemplating. Yet, the memory of her cramped apartment, the nagging phone calls from her mother about the family's financial woes, and her own hunger for a better life propelled her forward. She thought of the rumor about the mansion he might gift to the mother of his child. Looking around at the opulence that enveloped her, it was not hard to imagine how such a rumor might have started. This mansion was a testament to his wealth and influence, a symbol of the unimaginable life that could be hers, if only she could find the perfect moment to carry out her plan. And that moment, she believed, was drawing closer. Over the next month, Nkem's new role as Anita's assistant brought her into Odion's vicinity several times. Although most of those encounters were cursory, fleeting moments where they crossed paths in hallways or exchanged polite greetings, they were enough for Nkem to observe his routines. She learned that Odion was fastidious about his health, working out in his private gym early each morning. He held countless late-night meetings in his study. He rarely partied and almost never entertained guests except for business associates or close family. In her downtime, Nkem tried to rationalize the extremes of her scheme. She knew the moral lines were blurred. Stealing a used condom to impregnate herself was not just unethical, it was deeply personal theft. A part of her recoiled at the idea. Her upbringing had instilled strong moral fiber. She was taught that her body was a temple and that a child should be born out of love and commitment. Yet, survival instincts warred with these ideals. She remembered the nights she had gone hungry, the phone calls from her mother pleading for help with medical bills, and the humiliations she had endured while job hunting in Lagos. Those memories fueled her determination to find a way, any way, to secure a stable future. Then fate provided an opening. Anita told Nkem she would be traveling out of the country for a few weeks to visit family. Odion, upon hearing that Anita's assistant would be left idle, offered Nkem a temporary position in his household staff, helping with filing paperwork and overseeing minor administrative tasks for his philanthropic foundation. "You already know about the scholarship program," Odion remarked briskly. "You might as well help me with the documentation." Despite feeling her pulse hammering in her ears, Nkem outwardly remained calm. She accepted with a polite smile and a simple "Thank you, sir. I'll do my best." Inside, she was jubilant. She would be working under the same roof as Odion, with opportunities to learn his routines even more intimately. If ever there was a chance to execute her plan, it was now. Her new role began quietly enough. Each morning, she organized paperwork in a small office adjacent to Odion's study. Occasionally, she was called to assist with errands, picking up documents from the printing room or emailing updates to philanthropic partners. She proved efficient, and Odion rarely had complaints. Once or twice, he even complimented her organizational skills. "You're surprisingly good at this," he remarked in a rare moment of levity. "I'm accustomed to lazy interns who can't file a paper without messing up alphabetical order." Nkem felt a small surge of pride. She began to suspect that beneath his stern, businesslike exterior, Odion might be a kind man, someone who genuinely cared about his community and employees. The thought clawed at her conscience. Was she truly ready to betray him in such a personal manner? Yet each evening as she returned to her humble apartment, the weight of her reality bore down on her. One night, she discovered her electricity had been disconnected due to unpaid bills. Candles and a small flashlight were her only sources of light. Another evening, she received a frantic call from her mother, weeping about an emergency medical fee that needed to be paid for her father's high blood pressure treatment. When faced with these harsh truths, the moral dilemma paled in comparison to the urgency of survival. And so, Nkem's mind honed in on a step-by-step plan. She noticed that Odion, like many health-conscious men, practiced safe sex when he occasionally brought a companion to his home. It didn't happen often, but rumors among some of the older staff suggested that Odion had discreet rendezvous with select women, usually high-society individuals seeking to remain hidden from paparazzi. On those rare nights, he would instruct his staff to remain scarce, with only minimal personnel on duty. If Nkem could orchestrate being on duty during one of these nights, she might find an opportunity to retrieve a used condom before it was discarded. It was a gamble, dependent on timing and stealth. She prepared carefully, plastic gloves, a sterile container, and a plan for how she'd store the condom after retrieving it. She also researched fertility clinics and learned how in vitro methods worked, though she couldn't afford such a procedure. More realistically, she hoped to do the deed on her own, extract the sperm from the condom and impregnate herself. Despite feeling her stomach churn at the thought, she continued to rationalize that this was the only path left open to her. Weeks passed without any sign that Odion would entertain a companion at home. Then, one Thursday evening, while Nkem was organizing a stack of receipts from a recent fundraiser, she overheard Odion speaking to someone on the phone in his study. His low voice carried through the partially open door. "Yes. I understand. That's fine. I'll have the staff retire early. Just come by the side entrance. We'll talk inside." The pause. Then he added in an almost affectionate tone, "I'm looking forward to seeing you." Nkem's pulse spiked. She checked the schedule posted for household staff. That evening, the head of staff had a family emergency, and only 2 other staff members were on duty, neither of whom would likely be near Odion's private quarters. As for Nkem, she was free to work late, claiming she had to finish the fundraiser's budget summary. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She made sure to stay discreetly in her office as the hours ticked by. Around 10 p.m., she heard muffled voices and laughter emanating from Odion's suite at the far end of the corridor. The rest of the house was quiet, most of the lights had been turned off. Her heart hammered in her chest as she waited for an opportune time. Midnight approached. Nkem stepped out into the hallway, each footstep slow and measured. A single lamp illuminated the corridor. Her ears strained for any sound of footsteps or conversation. Eventually, she heard a soft click, like a door being gently shut. She pressed herself against the wall, breath shallow. Another door down the corridor opened, the bathroom door, she surmised. A few moments later, she heard the unmistakable rustling of a small plastic wrapper and water running. Her mind raced. That had to be the sound of a condom being disposed of. Summoning her courage, Nkem tiptoed toward the bathroom. She heard the water turn off, the door click open. She froze. Through a small gap, she saw a slender woman draped in a silk robe step out, glancing around briefly before returning to the bedroom. Nkem's heart threatened to burst from her chest. This was it, the window of opportunity. She slipped quietly into the bathroom once she was sure the woman was gone. Inside, warm steam lingered, and the air smelled faintly of scented soap. Nkem's gaze darted to the small trash bin by the sink. Her hands shaking, she donned the plastic gloves she had hidden in her pockets. Carefully, she lifted the lid of the bin and saw it, a single used condom tied in a knot. Her breath caught in a mix of revulsion and excitement. With practiced motion, she wrapped the condom in a sterile plastic pouch and sealed it. She tucked it carefully into the concealed container in her bag. Her hands trembled violently. Adrenaline pumped through her veins, making her feel both exhilarated and nauseous. She had just done the unthinkable. She left the bathroom swiftly, her senses on high alert. No one was in the hallway. She snuck back to the small office, powered down her computer, and gathered her belongings. It took all her restraint to walk calmly through the corridors and exit the mansion without raising suspicion. Once outside the gate, the warm Lagos night air hit her like a tidal wave of realization. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. Nkem caught a taxi home, the container cradled protectively in her arms, as though it contained the key to her entire future. She still had one more precarious step, ensuring that the stolen seed would indeed take root within her. Tomorrow, in the privacy of her dilapidated apartment, she would attempt the final part of her plan. And even though guilt gnawed at her, she convinced herself that this was necessary, that she had no other choice if she wanted to rise above the life fate had handed her. Early the next morning, sunlight filtered through the cracks in Nkem's thin curtains. She hardly slept, her mind filled with the enormity of the act she was about to commit. The container sat on a small desk that also served as her dining table. She had read online that sperm viability decreases with time, so every minute that passed heightened her anxiety. After a hasty cup of tea, she locked her door and drew the curtains. The anxiety she felt was interwoven with a grim sort of determination. Taking a deep breath, she retrieved the stolen condom, carefully opening the knot. Her hands shook as she followed the rudimentary instructions she had memorized from an online source, a questionable forum discussing at-home insemination methods. Using a simple syringe, she transferred what she hoped were still living sperm into her body. The process felt surreal, almost like an out-of-body experience. When it was done, she lay on her bed, her legs elevated by pillows, tears burning in her eyes. It was a mixture of guilt, fear, and an odd form of triumph. She knew this was a gamble. There was no guarantee it would work. Yet, for Nkem, hope had rarely been so tangible. If she succeeded, she could, in theory, carry Odion's child, harness the rumored promise of the mansion, and secure her family's future. But if she failed, she would be just another desperate girl, stuck in the same cycle of poverty. In the days that followed, she continued her duties at Odion's home and his philanthropic foundation. She avoided him as much as possible, terrified that her face or demeanor might betray her secrets. On the surface, everything carried on as normal. Odion showed no sign of suspicion, burying himself in business deals, charity events, and occasional family dinners. Meanwhile, Nkem vacillated between hope and despair. Each day, she obsessively noted any changes in her body, slight nauseas, a missed period, or unusual fatigue. She had read that early pregnancy symptoms often mirrored regular hormonal fluctuations, but each twinge or wave of dizziness felt like a potential signal. After 2 weeks, she took a cheap pregnancy test bought from a local pharmacy. The result was negative, and she felt her heart plunge into a chasm of disappointment. She resolved to test again in another week, fearful that the first test might not have detected early hormones. Her emotional turmoil intensified when she received another call from home. Her father's health had worsened. The hospital demanded immediate payment for a new procedure. That night, Nkem locked herself in her apartment, burying her head in a threadbare pillow to smother the sound of her sobs. She had never felt more alone or more aware of the precariousness of her plan. A week later, she took a second test. This time, 2 faint pink lines appeared. She blinked furiously, unsure if her eyes were deceiving her. The lines were light, but unmistakable. They formed a small cross that spelled hope. Her trembling fingers nearly dropped the test as she stared in a mix of awe and dread. She was pregnant. She was actually carrying Odion's child, if all had gone according to her clandestine mission. For an hour, she sat on her bed, the small test stick in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. She thought of her parents, the mansion rumor, the swirl of moral conflict that threatened to drown her. But beneath everything, a seed of triumph began to bloom. She was pregnant with a billionaire's child. Her life, she believed, was irrevocably changed. The next morning, with fresh resolve, she reported to work at Odion's mansion. She planned her next steps meticulously. First, she needed official confirmation from a reliable clinic. She scheduled a discreet appointment at a small private hospital far from her neighborhood, paying extra to ensure her information remained confidential. The results confirmed what the cheap test had indicated. She was pregnant, approximately 4 weeks along. Still, caution reigned. She knew better than to burst into Odion's study and announce the news. Instead, she began to strategize how best to leverage her pregnancy. She recalled local tabloids that had once reported a rumor. Odion Esang pledges a luxury mansion in Banana Island to the mother of his child. She wondered about the authenticity of that rumor. It might be something the media had exaggerated. But she also reasoned that Odion, being desperate for an heir, might be more than willing to care for the mother of his unborn child if it meant securing a lineage. She decided to wait until she was at least 2 or 3 months pregnant, when it would be safer to reveal her secret. Meanwhile, she discreetly resigned from her role in Odion's household, claiming a family emergency required her to return to the countryside. She feared that if she remained close, her anxiety or pregnancy symptoms might reveal her secret prematurely. Instead, she wrote a heartfelt letter of resignation to Odion, thanking him for the opportunity and the support. When asked by the household staff if she'd return, she only gave vague smiles and left without a firm date. Back in her cramped apartment, she made arrangements to move. She used her meager savings from recent event jobs to secure a better room in a slightly nicer part of town, someplace where prying neighbors wouldn't notice her changing body as easily. She spun a web of half-truths to explain her relocation, claiming she had found a job opportunity abroad and would be gone for an extended period. In reality, she was preparing for the day when her pregnancy would show and Odion would be forced to acknowledge her condition and his child. As the weeks rolled on, nausea and fatigue became her regular companions. She missed the normalcy of her day-to-day tasks, but each pang of morning sickness reminded her that she was inching closer to her goal. She dared to envision a future where her child grew up in a mansion, free from the shackles of poverty that had weighed her down. And yet, on nights when she struggled to find comfortable positions to sleep, a hollow ache in her chest warned her that life rarely follows a neat script. No matter how carefully she plotted, the future with Odion, and that promised mansion, was far from guaranteed. Nkem tried to chase away the doubt, reminding herself of her father's mounting hospital bills and her own desperation. She carried the faint memory of Odion's kind gestures, a man who had built schools, donated to orphanages, and spoken so passionately about giving children a chance at a better life. Would he not care for his own child, no matter the circumstances of its conception? She clung to that belief, convincing herself that once the truth was out, he would do the honorable thing. Yet, in the hidden recesses of her mind, she knew there was a looming threat that everything could come crashing down: betrayal, legal battles, or worse, Odion's wrath if he discovered the deceptive manner in which she had become pregnant. But for now, Nkem pushed these thoughts aside. She had come too far, sacrificed too much, to turn back. By the time Nkem was 3 months along, her belly had begun to show a subtle curve. She woke each morning feeling both profound awe at the life growing inside her and an undercurrent of dread about the confrontation that lay ahead. She had spent many hours rehearsing how she would deliver the news to Odion. Would she do it in person, or send a letter? Should she involve a lawyer, or approach him in private? One morning, her phone buzzed with a message from Anita, who had just returned from her travels abroad. "Where are you?" "Odion needs help with some final scholarship tasks," the text read. Nkem's pulse sped up. This was the perfect chance. Anita still thought she was in Lagos. After all, Nkem had only claimed a temporary departure. She decided to meet Anita at her earliest convenience and orchestrate a meeting with Odion. The timing, she figured, was right. They agreed to meet at Anita's penthouse apartment in Victoria Island, a sleek residence with high ceilings and a view of the Lagos Lagoon. Despite the upscale surroundings, Anita welcomed her warmly. "So good to see you, my dear," she exclaimed, offering a hug. Nkem tried to angle her body to hide her slight bump, praying it wasn't obvious under her loose-fitting gown. Sitting on a plush sofa, Anita discussed plans for expanding the scholarship program. She mentioned Odion was frustrated by delays in funding approvals. "We really need to finalize the budgets," Anita said. "He asked me if you could come by his office tomorrow. You always handled the documentation so efficiently." Nkem's mouth went dry. Tomorrow. This was sooner than she expected. But perhaps it was better to get it over with. She nodded. "I'll be there," she replied softly. "Are you all right, Nkem?" "You seem distracted," Anita observed, her tone laced with genuine concern. Nkem forced a smile. "I'm fine, just a bit tired. Things have been busy." Anita studied her for a moment but let the matter drop. After an hour of discussion, Nkem excused herself, promising to meet Odion the next day. She left the penthouse with her heart in turmoil. She was not sure how the conversation with Odion would go, but she had no choice now. She would have to tell him everything, well, nearly everything. She planned to say they had a one-night stand, perhaps the night of the gala when the staff had been minimal. She might feign a partial memory or confusion, anything to avoid revealing the sordid truth of her condom theft. The following day, she dressed in a loose blouse and a long skirt, hoping to remain as inconspicuous as possible. She arrived at Esang Global Holdings, bypassing the reception area thanks to Anita's clearance. Security escorted her to Odion's private office on the top floor. The office was palatial, with a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Lagos skyline. Odion sat behind a massive mahogany desk, papers strewn about. He glanced up, offering a polite nod. "Welcome back. Good to see you," he said curtly, though not unkindly. "Anita said you'd help with finalizing some scholarship documents. We're behind schedule." Nkem approached, her palms clammy. She managed a faint smile. "Of course, sir. I'm here to help. But there's something I need to discuss with you privately first." Odion looked perplexed, but he rose and gestured to a small sitting area with 2 leather chairs. "All right," he said, leading her away from his desk. He sat, crossing his legs, his gaze focused on her. "What is it?" Her heart hammered so loudly she felt sure he could hear it. Hands shaking, she clasped them in her lap. She had rehearsed this moment, but now words failed her. I'm pregnant," she finally blurted out, her voice trembling. She watched Odion's eyes widen in shock. The seconds seemed to stretch into an eternity. "I see," he managed, his tone carefully neutral. "Congratulations. I suppose. But why are you telling me this?" Nkem swallowed hard. "It's yours," she said quietly. I was at your house a few months ago working. I'm not sure if you remember, but Odion's expression turned from confusion to disbelief, then to anger. He rose abruptly, pacing around. "This is ridiculous. I've never touched you. I don't mix business with pleasure. Ever." Her cheeks burned. "Maybe you don't remember. There was a night, you had company, you were drinking and—" He cut her off. "Stop. Are you suggesting I was so drunk that I somehow bedded my own employee and don't even recall it? That's absurd." Tears stung her eyes. The confrontation was more brutal than she'd imagined. "I'm telling the truth," she insisted, forcing herself to sound confident. "I have no reason to lie. I've not been with any other man. If you want a paternity test, we can arrange that after the baby is born." Odion ran a hand over his face, as though trying to quell his rising temper. "This is a scam," he muttered, shooting her a withering glare. "I've seen these tactics before, women showing up, claiming they're pregnant with my child. I'm not a fool." Nkem recoiled, her voice nearly breaking. "I'm not a con artist. I just want you to accept responsibility." He stared at her, eyes flickering with suspicion. For a moment, it seemed he might call security. Then, surprising her, his posture softened slightly. "You claim you're pregnant with my child. Fine. I will handle this through my lawyers. If this is real, and if a test proves the child is mine, I'll take care of it. But if you're lying—" His voice trailed off, the unspoken threat hanging in the air. Nkem exhaled shakily. This was not how she envisioned it. She had hoped he would recall a fabricated one-night stand, or at least be uncertain enough to treat her with gentleness. Instead, she saw steel in his eyes. She forced herself to remain calm. "I understand," she said. "I'll provide whatever proof you need." He nodded curtly, returning to his desk. "Anita will be in touch. For now, finish the scholarship documentation. We'll settle your allegations later." The rest of the meeting was painfully tense. Nkem dutifully worked on spreadsheets, aware of Odion's cold gaze occasionally piercing her. By the time she left, her entire body was trembling. She clutched her belly protectively in the elevator, fighting back tears. This was a man she had hoped would welcome the idea of an heir, perhaps even offering that rumored mansion. Instead, he seemed ready to wage war. Over the next week, Odion's lawyers reached out to Nkem, requesting her medical records and setting a date for a paternity test once the baby was far enough along. She complied, sending them the ultrasound scans and any relevant documents, all while maintaining her lie about how she conceived. If she refused, she risked losing any chance of financial support. Guilt gnawed at her day and night. She felt the weight of her deception crushing her spirit, especially as she underwent prenatal checkups and saw the tiny heartbeat flicker on the ultrasound screen. She was carrying a life, an innocent soul who would inevitably be thrust into a whirlwind of scandal once the truth emerged. Then a surprising development occurred. Anita contacted her privately, suggesting a sit-down meeting without the presence of lawyers. Odion is livid. But I believe in giving people the benefit of the doubt, Anita confessed over the phone. I convinced him to meet with you at my place this weekend. Maybe we can reach an understanding. Hope flared in Nkem's chest, though a shadow of fear trailed behind it. She desperately wanted to believe that an amicable agreement could be reached, one that would give her and her unborn child a secure future. But she also knew that Odion might dig deeper, question her story, or demand an immediate DNA test using advanced procedures. That weekend, Nkem arrived at Anita's penthouse, her nerves on edge. She found Odion already there, standing by a window with a glass of water in hand. He nodded at her stiffly. Anita ushered them both into a comfortable seating area. Outside, the sky threatened rain, dark clouds gathering as if reflecting the tension inside. Odion spoke first, his voice clipped. Let me get straight to the point. You say this child is mine. I don't believe you, but I'm willing to cover medical expenses until we can do a paternity test after the birth. If the test proves I'm the father, then I'll provide for the child. But I want no further deception. Understood? Nkem's eyes welled with tears of relief. He was at least offering some support, albeit begrudgingly. She nodded. That's fair, she managed. The meeting ended with Odion making it clear he had no intention of offering her a mansion or any lavish support unless the paternity test came back positive. Rumor or no rumor, he was not that naive. Disheartened, Nkem left the penthouse, her thoughts a tangled mess. She had expected this to be easier, and she certainly hadn't anticipated Odion's intense skepticism. Over the next few months, her belly grew along with her internal turmoil. She continued to receive monthly stipends for basic medical care, all while a creeping anxiety took root. What if the child's DNA matched Odion's, but he continued to resent her? Would he even want the child in his life, let alone give her that rumored mansion? She pictured raising the baby alone, facing public scandal and condemnation. As her due date approached, Nkem realized she had a bigger problem. Though the baby was undoubtedly Odion's biologically, the method of conception was fraudulent. She dreaded the day her child would ask about their father and the day Odion might discover the truth. But that day had not arrived yet. For now, she had to focus on safely bringing this life into the world. When she finally went into labor, Anita, moved by compassion, helped Nkem secure a decent hospital and covered some additional costs. Odion didn't show up at the hospital, but Anita promised he would arrange for a paternity test as soon as the baby was stable. After several hours of painful contractions, Nkem delivered a healthy baby boy. Exhausted and teary-eyed, she held him in her arms, overwhelmed by a rush of love she hadn't expected. Days later, Odion appeared at the hospital for the DNA test. He gazed at the newborn, his expression unreadable. The test was done swiftly, and everyone awaited the results with bated breath. When the doctor finally confirmed the child was indeed Odion's, a shock wave seemed to ripple through the room. Odion closed his eyes for a moment, then nodded curtly. He left without a word to Nkem, but Anita stayed behind to comfort her. He just needs time, Anita murmured. He will come around. Days turned into weeks. Word spread in hushed whispers that Odion Esang had a child. The tabloids eventually picked it up. Speculations ran wild. Who is the mother? Will he fulfill his promise of gifting her a mansion? Is this the heir he's been waiting for? But to Nkem's dismay, Odion remained distant. He sent monthly allowances for the child, but nothing more. The rumored mansion remained just that, a rumor. Days turned into weeks. Word spread in hushed whispers that Odion Esang had a child. The tabloids eventually picked it up. Speculations ran wild. Who is the mother? Will he fulfill his promise of gifting her a mansion? Is this the heir he's been waiting for? But to Nkem's dismay, Odion remained distant. He sent monthly allowances for the child, but nothing more. The rumored mansion remained just that, a rumor. Though her initial goal had been to secure a mansion through this audacious plan, motherhood changed Nkem in ways she hadn't anticipated. Holding her baby at night, she felt remorse for her deceit, wondering how it would affect the child's future. Slowly, she began to grasp that genuine love and support for her son was more valuable than any mansion's walls. The day she finally confronted Odion about the child's future, her voice trembled not from fear but from a mother's concern. She didn't bring up the rumor or demand a mansion. Instead, she asked if he would be part of his son's life. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes: regret, uncertainty, maybe even compassion. Odion exhaled heavily, looking at the child asleep in a crib. "I can't change how this happened," he said, voice subdued. "But I won't deny him a father." In that moment, Nkem realized she had won something far more important than a mansion. She had secured a future for her child with a father's acceptance. Though she had crossed moral boundaries and carried a burden of guilt, she found a sliver of redemption in motherhood, and an uncertain yet hopeful path ahead. The rumor about the mansion lingered in the public sphere, but behind closed doors, Nkem learned that truly changing her life was about more than stolen opportunities. It was about finding genuine connections and forging a better destiny for her son. In that sense, she had finally stepped away from the darkness of her scheme, toward a light of possibility that outshone even the grandest estate money could buy. The end. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.